evening. I'm calling this meeting to order, noting public notice of this meeting was posted at the school district office and website, all school buildings, the Lodi Enterprise, the Portage Daily Register, Lodi City Hall, Lodi Town Hall, the Dane Village Hall, and Dane Township Hall, West Point Town Hall, Vienna Town Hall, Lodi Public Library, and mailed to clerks at Arlington, Decorah, and Roxbury Townships. Can I have a motion to go into close, please?
I'll make a motion.
You gotta read it.
It's right there.
Yeah, just read that line.
No.
I make a motion to adjourn to closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statute section 19.85 and to consider employment and compensation for coaches and crew and performance evaluation data and initial reviews specific personnel issues and to deliberate the purchase of public properties.
I'll second.
Here, Ricks, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone? Is this where we gotta do roll
Yeah, we
call?
have to do the roll call.
Roll call. Bill Beers?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So motion carries 6-0. Good evening. We are already in open session. First item is to the approval of the agenda.
Make a motion to approve agenda. Second.
Westfall, Whipperfirth, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries 7-0. We do not have any taking positive steps of service awards this evening. We have a presentation on finance referendum overview with our business manager.
I'm going to turn it over to Dan. This is something that he's put together, which we'll be using not just obviously for tonight, but hopefully as we move forward in informing the public to make sure that facts and information are presented on the actual impact of one and all of the questions that relate to the referendum. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dan.
All right, thanks, Chuck. I'm going to have to MacGyver it here a little bit with this mouse because our clicker I can't find the remote for, but I think we should be able to make it work.
What? Oh, it wants to start it new.
All right. So, let's talk a little bit about the puzzle, the funding puzzle of how we fund our public schools here in the school district of Lodi and what's brought us to the referendum that we're going to be talking about on November 8th. All right, we will do it the old-fashioned way. So, the state constitution requires that throughout Wisconsin, we will have district schools established by the legislature, which will be as nearly uniform as practicable. And you could have a whole session about what exactly that means. But the picture and the myth that folks have when they talk about school funding is the backpack full of cash. The state appropriates a certain amount of money each year, divide that by the number of students, everybody gets that. That's not how we fund schools in Wisconsin. The reality is that school funding is a partnership between local districts and the state. And the bulk of that, about 90%, is funded equally with property taxes and with state aids. Other funding sources, the feds only kick in about 7% of the cost of schools, which often surprises people considering how involved they are policy-wise. But the federal share is only 7% statewide. The other 4% are fees and other sources. The largest piece of that funding, about 90% of that state pot, comes through something called equalization aid. And I thought I would talk a little bit about how this works and understand how it impacts Lodi and our decision-making process as to why we went to this referendum. So the basic idea behind school funding is that Wisconsin has 422 school districts, each with its own circumstances, its own needs, and its own property tax base, sort of illustrated with these pictures at the bottom. The theory is that if all districts tax at the same rate, let's say it was 10 mills, depending on a district's property value, some would raise more money, some would raise less money. What state equalization aid is meant to do is really equalize those resources, top everybody up to the same level. So the districts with lower property values get more state aid, districts with higher property values get less state aid or none. That's the basic theory that's been in place since 1947. What drives state aid is a combination of three factors. The first one is equalized property value. The Department of Administration at the state takes all the assessments that all the counties, municipalities do and equalizes them, makes them comparable from place to place, county to county, so that we're all working off of the same playing field. The second piece is the district's local costs. What we spend on educating our kids using property taxes and this state general equalization aid. In the law, in the business, we call that shared cost. But it's the share of the district's costs that is a combination of state aid and local property taxes. The final piece of the puzzle is our resident students. And we take an FTE, full-time equivalent number, because our 4K students only count as 0.6 FTE funding-wise. All of our other students count as 1. Put them all together, and that's something called membership in the state law. So these three pieces, property value, shared cost, membership. And what we actually do is we take the property value and we take the shared cost and we divide it by the membership. So we're really only basing it off of 2 numbers rather than 3. Property value, shared cost per member. In addition, we're not just looking at Lodi. We are comparing what is going on with these numbers in Lodi to what's going on throughout the rest of the state. We can make the same decisions, run the same district, run the same costs year after year. And depending on what's going on throughout the rest of the state, our aid might vary dramatically. In this whole comparison, the only number that we at the district office and these folks up front really have any control of is this number right here, what we spend. The rest of that are external forces, ongoing trends, demographics. The calculation is fairly complex, but to give an illustration of how it works, what we do is we start with our district costs, what we spent per year, and that gets split up into 3 different levels or 3 different tiers of costs. The bottom level is $1,000 per student. The middle level goes from $1,000 to 90% of the statewide average spending, and then there's a top level that goes beyond that. And what we do is at each level, we compare the property value per member here in Lodi or in any other district, compare it to some statewide numbers, take a fraction, and come up with a district state aid. This illustration, the dark shaded portion, is the state aid for a district with relatively low property value per member. They're going to be aided at all 3 levels. They're going to get a relatively large fraction of their property value given as state aid. Now, for a district like Lodi, with above average property values, we can actually be negatively aided through the formula, meaning that when you take that comparison of what's going on in Lodi, or a district like Lodi, to what's going on throughout the state, you can actually get a negative number. And we, at the top level of the state aid formula, we in Lodi are negatively aided. It's called a negative tertiary district. That's what it means when we talk about that. That negative aid at the top level bites into, takes out some of the aid at the middle level, and reduces our aid payment. This is the mechanism in the aid formula that equalizes resources, redistributes money across districts. Now, if you are a very, very property wealthy district, you can be negatively aided at multiple levels. The aid that you get at the bottom level is a guarantee for every district. The aid at the higher levels are not. Fortunately, we in Lodi are not there yet, but there are a number of districts, particularly rural districts throughout the state, who are in this position where they're generating little or no state aid. The vast majority of their costs are on the local property tax dollar. The takeaway from this, and we could have a whole session about how state aid works, But the basic assumption of the aid formula is that the best way for us to measure in Wisconsin a local school district's ability to pay is their property value per resident student, per member. And that manifests itself in some interesting ways. If you compare us here in Lodi to some of our neighbors, in Lodi we're a shade under $700,000 of property value for every resident student. In Wanakee, they're quite a bit below us. They're at $570,000. In Portage, they're even lower than that at $486,000. Why? Well, we have that lakefront property up on Lake Wisconsin in Okie. That certainly inflates our property value relative to the amount of students that we have. Portage is a number you might expect if you think about Lodi, think about Portage, think about what they have industrially and commercially. Wanakee is a very weird duck in the state aid formula. Wanakee has a lot of development, a lot of growth, but the people who move to Wanakee have school-age kids. And that puts a lot of numbers into the denominator of those fractions and makes them appear to the state aid formula to be a moderate wealth district. Socioeconomically, these numbers might not necessarily reflect the reality. And that is really the disconnect when people talk about the state aid formula is broken. We're thinking about school districts and communities in terms of their property wealth, regardless of how many kids they have, regardless of how many jobs they have, regardless of the income in the community. This is the way that it's set up. It's been set up this way for 40 years. People have talked about changing it for 40 years. I don't see that happening anytime soon. The formula does what it's intended to do. Sort of a Robin Hood, equalize resources, take state aid from the wealthier districts, give state aid to the less wealthy districts. But, and this is an important consideration, those of you who watched the news Thursday night, I was interviewed by Channel 15 following up on a press conference that had happened in downtown Madison, where some of the Assembly Democrats were talking about the state aid that had been given to districts before Act 10 until now. Well, that's an incomplete picture. State aid that we get is not very determinative of the financial resources that we have available to educate students here in Lodi. It's only half the puzzle. The other half that we have to talk about is the revenue limit. And the revenue limit is really what matters for what's available to educate our kids in our community. So, to provide a little background, revenue limit began in 1993 under Tommy Thompson, and it was set up as a way to help control property taxes. So it limited the total amount of revenue for local costs that a district to raise to a combination of the property taxes that they raise and the state equalization aid they receive. Now, from the beginning, from 1993 all the way up to 2009, there was a built-in increase for inflation. The idea being that we want to make sure districts can keep up with their costs as they grow up and grow over time. But we certainly don't want them to go beyond that without having to go to the voters and face a referendum. That changed in 2009, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, the other side of this is that the deal that for the revenue limit also included something called two-thirds funding, which people used to talk a lot about. The idea was that the state would put into the total pot of revenue limit, two-thirds of that money statewide would be aid, the other third would be on the property tax, but between different districts, some would be more aided, some would be less aided, it would go through the formula. That's where we started. Now, the way that the revenue limit works when you combine aid and taxes is the revenue limit is just a calculation per student with a lot of different caveats and corrections and exemptions, but it is a constraint on total funds. What comes next is your state aid is the portion of that total that does not have to be covered by the local property tax levy. The rest of it is property taxes. Revenue limit minus state aid equals property taxes. That's how the system functions. Now, just putting aid, the state just putting aid into the formula doesn't put any money in the classroom. So this school year, the state put $85 million more into the aid formula than it went in last year. Not one dime of that is going into the classroom because they kept the revenue limit steady per student compared to last year. All of that's going to tax relief. The only way that you can make sure money goes into the classroom is to increase the revenue limit. And this is something that a lot of folks do not understand, is that the pot the state makes available is just part of the equation. You have to touch the revenue limit to increase resources in the classroom. As I said, the revenue limit formula was designed with inflation in mind. And for the first 16 years, Wisconsin had inflationary increases every year built into the formula. Referenda were occasional, they would often fail. And then everything changed. The world changed in 2009. The recession hit. And if you'll remember at the time, Governor Doyle was in office, the Democrats were in control of the legislature, and they were concerned about the growth in property taxes. So, in the 2009-2011 biennial budget, that inflationary piece was broken. Instead, they put in a $200 per student increase, still significant, but below the rate of inflation. That's what started the change in how we fund schools. The biggie, of course, Governor Walker was elected, and Act 10 happened. We all remember that. It's been 5.5 years now. It doesn't seem that long ago, but it's been quite a long time since then. Act 10 was the labor relations piece. The financial piece was Act 32. So those of us in school business world think of this as Act 32, but everybody calls it Act 10. So on the slide, I'm going to call it Act 10 and Act 32. That year, for that first year, 2011-2012, was the first time that the state ever cut the revenue limit. Every district was subjected to a 5.5% decrease in the revenue limit, which actually took us below where we were before the recession. Since then, the state's increases, as shown on the yellow line, have been low to non-existent. This current budget, it's been $0 both years of the current biennium. Now, the legislators did something to mitigate that. They get a little feisty when people don't mention it. But they put into place in 2012 something called the per pupil aid. Per pupil aid is a categorical aid. Categorical aids are state funds that live outside of the revenue limit. Traditionally, this was money designated for particular things like special ed, transportation, library books. This is the first time that they've ever put a general aid outside the revenue limit. So the per pupil aid was designed to help mitigate the impact of this decline, and that's shown on the red line on the screen. It has helped. We are grateful to have it. But even with the per pupil aid, even after those tools of Act 10 were used, we are still losing out to inflation. Fortunately, and we'll get into the impact in Lodi, it hasn't been quite this significant over the past several years. And I'll talk about why. If you just look at the abstract, and you can run the revenue limit formula back, you can run computations, you can figure this out. But if the law had never changed, we would have continued to see inflationary increases in our total revenue over the past several years. It would have slowed down the past 4 or 5 years as our enrollment has declined somewhat. Although this year it looks like that may have stabilized. We'll see how that turns out on Friday. But what actually happened in Lodi is that we saw, again, that significant 5.5% type cut from 2010-11 to 11-12. And then since then, our revenue has basically been flat. The revenue limit itself would have started declining. That per pupil aid has sort of helped us keep up. What has been helpful to the district and what has mitigated more serious impacts on our students and our staff are the referenda that we've had. And we've been lucky and fortunate to have the community support 2 referenda over this period. The initial one, which was approved actually on Election Day 2008, and then the current $950,000 referendum, of which this school year, is the final year. So that has mitigated the pain from Act 10, Act 32, and the school funding climate since then. But that's ending. And if nothing else changes, we're going to take an almost $1 million hit in our revenue, and then we're going to remain stagnant while our health care and other costs continue to increase. That gap is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So, November 8th, we're having a referendum. The board put 3 questions on the ballot. First one, $1.7 million a year to cover school operations over the next 5 years. Second one, of course, $22 million in debt to construct a new primary school and reconfigure the other schools accordingly. And then $9 million for competition gymnasium and other athletic facilities at the high school. Now, what that $1.7 million means and what we're really asking for is going back to this chart showing where we've been and where we'll be if nothing else changes. What the board is asking the community is this, is to help us stabilize, help us not fall so far behind that gap by going from our current $950,000 referendum to a $1.7 million referendum. It's not going to make up all that ground, certainly. It's going to hold steady over the period of the referendum, but at least it will continue to mitigate the impact of the school funding changes we've seen over the past several years. It's limited in time. Once that 5-year period is done, it is done, and we'll have to revisit this issue again in light of what's going on throughout the state. But for 5 years, it would put us at a decent place. To put that number in context, what is $1.7 million? What does that mean to our kids, to our community? $1.7 million would be more or less 23 teachers out of a total staff of 116, a very significant fraction. It's 80% of what the school district spends on health insurance every year. If you think about it in terms of some of our ancillary services, this is 3 times what we spend on extracurriculars. So if the referendum fails, we could cut every sport, every activity, every theater, and that would get us a third of the way there. This is also twice what we spend on transportation. This is not a trivial sum of money in terms of resources. Now, in terms of the taxpayer, when you compare what your tax bill is going to look like this December to what the next tax bill would be if all 3 questions, if the referendum were to pass. So when you compare the $1.7 million to the $950,000, that equates to about $3.60 a week for the median homeowner in the school district of Lodi. So, again, providing some context. Second question we're asking, of course, construction of the primary school, and I certainly won't go into the details there, but just for reference, $22 million in debt. We would issue bonds, which are certainly different than going to a bank and borrowing money, but in some ways they are similar to a mortgage. And the impact for the district would be about $1.4 million a year over the next 21 years. The gym would be $9 million, and the impact that's projected would be about $800,000 a year over that same period. What will it cost? This is the question everyone has. This is certainly the question that came up at the last couple of board meetings. This is the question that the Lodi Enterprise called and asked me about. What will it cost? So up here on the chart, what I've got right now in gray is these are what's in place for this year. The dark gray part is the final year of our $950,000 referendum, and then the lighter gray part is the end of our debt on the middle and high schools, and this is in terms of the mill rate. So if you look, about $2.70 of our mill rate right now is on resolving these 2 referenda. These go away after this year. Now, if the operating referendum passes, over the next 5 years, it'll be about $1.60 on the mill rate. If the primary school passes, that'll be about $1.30, $1.40, and that'll get us up close to $3 on the mill rate. And then with the gym, the total amount runs about $3.50. So if all the questions pass, the community's tax rate is going to go from about $2.70 from what we're at now to about $3.50 after the referendum passes and comes into effect. How it affects the homeowner's tax bill? You run some calculations. We also have a version of that graph and the chart with the numbers over on the desk outside if you want to run your own numbers. But for the median homeowner, which is just a shade under $250,000, the net impact, and again, this is comparing that piece of paper you're going to get in the mail this December to what you'll get in the mail the following 5 years, is $204, roughly speaking. Now, we could certainly talk about this as $659 down and $863 up. That would certainly be an accurate statement. But when I think about what I'm paying for property taxes, I'm thinking about what that bill in the mail is going to be. So that year-on-year change, about $200 in that December tax bill. Bringing it home. What do I think is useful to think about as we consider this referendum and how it fits into our funding picture? Our base property tax level here in the school district Lodi depends far more on what happens down in the state capitol than the decision the board makes here. Basically, the choice that they have every single year is, do we levy to the max or do we cut things back even farther? The really meaningful decisions are made in Madison. They're not made here, unfortunately. Our costs continue to increase. Our health insurance continues to go up. The employment market for teachers, one unintended consequence of Act 10 that I don't think its supporters were thinking about, is Act 10 created a free market for teachers. And free market is great. Everybody loves a free market. But if you're trying to control costs, a free market for teachers, especially for teachers in higher demand, business ed, tech ed, science, special ed, is really reaching crisis portions in a lot of the state. Thank God here in Lodi we're close enough to Madison that we're not as badly off as some other districts farther north or farther west, a lot of whom didn't even start the school year with an entire staff and have been running on significant numbers of subs through the year or administrators in classrooms or combining classes. So it certainly could be worse in Lodi. But we are already having problems, serious problems, recruiting substitute teachers, recruiting educational aides. And I think without any other changes, this will likely spread through our other types of teachers and make vacancies harder and harder to fill over the next several years if we don't have the resources available. Our physical needs are serious, particularly and especially with the primary school. That primary school went up very soon after World War II. Like all schools in that period, it went up fast, it went up cheap. We've asked a lot of it over the years. It's really at the end of its design life. So that need is very real. Now the gymnasium, there's been a significant amount of community support. A good chunk of the community asked for that. The board's put that on the ballot. That's going to be for the voters to decide if the gym is a need or a want, yes or no. But as far as physical plant, student health, the primary school is really the serious need. Finally, we're actually at a very, very lucky and unique place in Lodi. We have two referendum questions, or two prior referendum pieces that are expiring at the same time. So making this ask of the community to reinvest in our school districts, we have the old referenda coming off, really mitigating the impact compared to what it might be if there was a gap where the tax rate would go way down and then we'd be asking it to go way back up. This would really be a much easier transition than if the referendum were to fail, we go a couple of years, and then we come back again. That would be a much larger shock in time than what is on the ballot this November 8th. So that's where we're at. If you have any more questions about the fiscal environment, the background, what this means from a functional perspective, I'm very happy to answer those. I know folks up here and folks in the district definitely know more than I do about the whole 2-year process of designing the facilities, can answer more questions about those. But I appreciate the time. Thanks very much.
Wow.
Great. Nice job.
Thank you, Dan. Did a great job. Next, we have public input. The purpose of citizen input agenda item is for the public to provide comments on any agenda item and to publicly address the Board of Education on items that pertain to school business. The amount of time allotted to each speaker will not generally exceed 5 minutes per person to allow all people who wish to speak an opportunity to be heard. However, I may modify the time at my discretion. The speaker has questions for the board. They will be duly noted and responses will be provided in an appropriate manner, but the board cannot respond to individual questions or individual comments as part of the public input agenda item. As an additional reminder, the board cannot take action on any item that is brought forth during the public input session or on any item that was not posted on the meeting agenda. Citizen input is an important part of the board meeting agenda, and the board appreciates hearing from the community on issues concerning them and our school district. If you're providing comments, I would merely ask that you come to the table with the microphone so people can hear you, and that you please state your name and what agenda item, if any, that you would like to address. Is there anyone here this evening that would like to come forward and address the board at this time? Okay, not seeing anyone coming forward. Next, we'll move on to the consent agenda. First is the approval of the minutes from the special meeting on August 25th, the special meeting on August 18th, and the regular board meeting on August 8th. We have vouchers, fundraiser requests for wrestling, a spaghetti dinner, 2 for FFA fruit sales, 2 for football cheerleading fundraisers, and the Thailand fundraiser. We do not have any fundraiser reports this evening. For field trip requests, we have the FFA National Convention. Under other, we have UW-Platteville Student Teacher MOU. Resignations, retirements, we have a high school special ed assistant, a middle school special ed assistant, middle school boys and girls basketball coach, the Thailand exchange coordinator. That's effective 17-18, high school special ed assistant, and middle school yearbook advisor. Under co-curricular, we have a volunteer volleyball coach, 2 volunteer football cheerleading advisors, the advocate advisor newspaper. We have first year mentors. There's 11 of them, and 2 of those are at 50%. We have six second year mentors, the athletic director, and PBIS advisors for the elementary school. Under the community program crew, we do not have anything this evening. Under regular staff, we have translating services, special ed assistants. There's 4 of them, 2 at the middle school and 2 at the high school. A food service worker, OSC long-term substitute teacher, and a Main Street teacher. Under personnel and other, we have the Sauk Prairie Hospital Trainer Agreement and leave without pay for 4 people. Is there any item that the board would like to pull off the consent agenda for separate consideration? If not, then I would take a motion to accept it as presented.
Make a motion to accept the consent agenda as written,
With the addition?
with the addition, when was it?
Go to your last one, your personnel, other, if the motion on what to add on there.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented with addition of the approval of the resignation of Diane Rendell as the high school special education assistant and Sue Torgensen as middle school yearbook advisor.
Second.
Rick's Whipperfirth, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Moving on to the agenda, we have the district facility study review.
Dan has done a pretty good job of just outlining all of the necessary things that comprise the referendum, but there are some things just for informational purposes and actions that you may need to take to move this forward. First thing I gave you is just a bond referendum timetable, just so that you know that these are the things that we are going to, between Maureen, myself, and Quarles and Brady, which is a firm in Milwaukee, bonding company. So we have already published the first initial referendum resolutions. We will have the second publishing of a Type A election notice on October 6th, and then a Type B NC election notice on November 3rd. All of these have to be documented, and we have to provide proof back to Quarles and Brady that those steps have been taken, so that you're aware that these things are going on behind the scenes on your behalf by myself and Maureen, and working with Quarles and Brady, who is our bonding company. Next thing was, I went through the referendum survey, and I tried to pull out the key things that seemingly were issues, some of which Dan kind of covered in his presentation. But if each of you or anyone else, administration or whatever, would take that list of items and go through that survey, and if you see other things that we need to make sure that we address as we move forward, and either in the form of frequently asked questions as we do presentations like Dan, or if we put out a community link, which I believe will be something that you might want to consider prior to the referendum, to make sure that we've addressed the concerns that came forth from that survey and answered those questions, because people either are misinformed or they don't know, or in some cases, it's our job to educate them and give them the facts and the information behind why some of the questions are on the ballot. Okay? The other issue that I put in front of you was the primary school, taking a look at, or at least I sent it out to you, why the referendum is necessary. Dan pointed out that it is an older facility, some of the challenges that come with it, but to be more specific, I put down the cost of any pending or required repairs that we would be looking at between 2017 and 2020, which includes a roof replacement, a new heating and ventilating system. The entire emergency lighting system needs to be replaced in that building because it's antiquated and in some cases failing. And obviously in an emergency, you want to make sure you have an emergency lighting system in place. The current water heaters, the water softener system, along with the parking lot and playground replacement, all add up to approximately in the neighborhood of about $2.5 to $3 million of costs that would go into a building that's already antiquated and in need of more than just those issues. But those are the key ones that I would say are absolute needs over the process of the next 2 to 3 years that we would have to address. I've also listed other things in terms of the retaining walls and some other issues that come with that building and with that site. But just as rationale that if people are asking you, why are we having concerns about that building, that gives you a sense of where we are, and there are some other things that go along with that. And then last but not least, what I sent you, and is on the actual board packet up here, is the brochure. If Maureen want to bring that up, just last time around when we did a referendum, we put together a brochure, which some of you may remember. It looked, if we get it up here, it looked like this, and it contained lots of different questions and lots of different information. So what I've done is started to put together kind of a draft is what I call it, of key things that you might want to consider putting into a brochure. But we do need to put something that you can use, that staff can use, people can hand out at either at events, co-curriculars, meetings that you might have out in the public, have them at different business places, et cetera, so that people can pick it up, have a quick summary of key issues related to the referendum, similar to what the things that Dan brought forth. So I've started that process. I've sent you some things. Please look it over, get information back to me, and between myself and Maureen and Adam Steinberg, who worked with us on the last one, has indicated he's willing to volunteer some time to help us put together this. And we also have another lady in our office who's kind of a graphic designer that will work with us to put something together. But the key is, what do you want on it in terms of information that goes to the public? So I modeled the information that I provided to you off from that former one. So I've kind of stuck with the questions of One of the big things that you noticed in the survey was, the fiscal responsibility of the board. So I kind of outlined from the past referendum how we use that money, what things it went into from the standpoint of the technology, the instruction, staff development, and the buildings and grounds projects, all of which every single year you promised and have delivered on at the annual meeting of laying it out, putting it on the screen, and showing it to the entire community what was spent and what it was spent on. That may or may not answer that question of fiscal responsibility, but it's everything that you promised that you would do and everything that you said you would do in order to justify where these monies were being spent. And you put it on the referendum brochure that you did the last time around. That's something that we're working on right now, is a 5-year plan saying, how are we going to spend this money? And it's something that we need to talk a little bit about in terms of what's going to go into technology, what's going to go into maintenance, what projects are high on our list in the facility committee, curriculum committees, and finance committees have been talking about this for over a year now, so it's not something that's going to be hard to pull together or strange to pull together. It's just we have to decide how we're going to present it and do it in a fashion that people can. And then I think Dan did a good job of, explaining why we need another referendum and the tax impact, which is always important. The rationale is kind of built into that same process. So again, look that over. If there's anything and information that you want to get to me or something that you feel should be included emphatically that I haven't outlined, let me know, and we'll continue and start working on that so that we can get this put together as soon as possible in a draft format and out to you to review and provide input on. Okay? Any questions about those items? Okay. Second one that we have to talk about is the PRA contract. Obviously, we've been working on an hour time and materials basis with Plunkett Racich. They've sent us a draft contract, and it's something that you should consider in terms of if you want to work with them, is to get a contract in place so that if and when a referendum were to pass, that you are ready to start immediately with the planning process, because that's something that you're not going to be able to sit around and wait on if there's a facility or renovations that have to take place, because there's meetings with staff, there's meetings with administration, there's actual building design that would have to go into place. And it doesn't necessarily have to be tonight, but I've given you a draft copy of the contract. If it's something that you feel you're ready to do, fine. If not, I can have it refined and bring it back at the October meeting and have you act on it at that point in time.
Where do we have that, Chuck?
I sent it to you.
Oh, it's in the email, in the emails?
Yeah.
Okay. That's not the,
Okay.
that's the.
And I actually presented it at the last board meeting also. So it's more of a discussion if you think that you're ready to go, or if you prefer to bring that back at the October meeting, I can do so.
Let's do it.
Yeah, we need to do it.
So the one that's included underneath this item is the draft for the construction services
Yes.
RPF?
Yep,
That's what we're talking about?
yep, that's the one we're talking
Okay.
about.
Oh,
So it'd
that-
be 8.01, and it's the last thing under the public content, underneath the administrative content.
All right, I'll make a motion that we accept the draft construction services RFP dated September 2016.
Second.
Rick's Whipperfirth, discussion?
It's no point in waiting.
Agreed.
Okay, we're going to do a roll call vote, starting with Rick's.
Yes.
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, the motion carries 7-0. Is that it underneath that? Okay. Next, we have an MOU with our Thailand school, and I need help. Why can I not learn how to say this? How many years have we been doing it?
San Wan Ying.
A lot.
San Wan Ying?
San Wan Ying.
Taiwan Wing School.
San Wan Ying.
Suphanburi, Thailand.
This is the fourth MOU we would be signing with them for the distance education classes. We've had our exchange longer than that. This is the fourth one. So first one we signed over Skype with myself and Mr. Chott. The second one, he and Mr. Padette, his principal, came, and we had a signing ceremony. If you remember, that was the one that was publicized in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, Portage paper, and our local paper here as well, all carried it. And then 2 years ago, the board sent me over to Thailand to sign MOU. We have, it's still in effect. We usually try to sign it well in advance. And so Mr. Chott is bringing 10 other teachers from Thailand, teachers and administrators from Thailand, in mid-October to sign this document to continue this for another 2 years.
Okay.
We are the only school in the state that I'm aware of that has a teacher from a foreign country teaching our students cultural geography of Southeast Asia. And who better to teach that than somebody who has lived it? And we turn around and teach U.S. history to students in Thailand as well.
That's Mark Cole that
Mark
teaches.
Cole, yep. Yep, he teaches at night. He misses a few night Packer games,
Yeah.
which kills him, but
Yeah.
he does it.
Is there a
Those
motion?
MOU.
Memorandum of Understanding?
I'd like to make a motion to provide formal approval for the extension of the memorandum of understanding between Sangyong
Ying.
School and Lodi to continue our student exchange and educational instruction programs.
Okay.
I'll second.
Westfall, Pear, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries 7-0.
So we'll be doing the signing ceremony on Thursday, October 13th in our Performing Arts Center at approximately, we haven't exactly limited, but about around 2:30. Right now it's a tentative start time, but we'll put together a formal agenda. I'm actually meeting with Mark Cole tomorrow to do that. And then our guests will be here for just a short time, 3 or 4 days, where there'll be visits in the classrooms and are being hosted by different staff across the district as well. So I appreciate those staff members hosting, being willing to open their homes. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And extra thanks, besides Vince, all the work that you do on this, extra thanks to Mark Cole for all the work that he does. And Joel, and I thought there was another person involved.
Commander and JP Foxbender this year.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Thailand trip fiscal agent.
Yeah, this is basically just a transfer of funds, but I'll let Dan explain what the purpose behind it is and why it's important for the visitors
So,
coming to the United States.
segueing off of Vince, the plan is for some folks from the school to come and sign the contract. They would also like to do some visiting and some staff development in Chicago over that period. They've done this over the previous years. Historically, Mr. Cole has handled this personally, financially, where he books everything and they reimburse him directly. From a risk management perspective, that's problematic for us, that's problematic for him. So our preference would be, and we've done basically the prep work, where this would be a money in, money out, where the school in Thailand wires us the funds to cover their trip. We pay the bills, it's a wash for us, and Mr. Cole avoids any potential issues that might crop up. And we avoid any potential for having district business on an individual's personal finances. So that's why we're recommending this. It's dollar in, dollar out, basically taken care of. So just looking for formal approval of the agreement.
I so move for formal approval of the agreement as stated.
I will second.
Pear, Westfall, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Next, we have the Kitty Corner Daycare contract.
This is an ongoing year-to-year contract, so this would just be the 2016-17 version of their contract to provide aftercare. I should say preschool and after school daycare in our elementary building.
I'll make a motion to approve the 2016-17 Kitty Corner Daycare contract.
Second.
Ricks, Viers, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Next, we have the substitute handbook.
Each year, as you know, you go through and you approve all the different employee handbooks, and this one just kind of slipped through the cracks, so to speak, and so it's just catching up and making sure that it got approved by the board as well.
I'll make a motion to approve the substitute teacher handbook.
I'll second.
Ricks, Pear, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Seclusion restraint report.
I'll turn that over to Tiffany. Each year, the district is required to provide a report both to the public as well as to the board, and so that's what this is all about. Tiffany.
We do it every year. I will say our numbers are a little higher this year. Last year and this year, we've added some students that had pretty significant behavioral challenges, and so these numbers are higher. But I will tell you that as soon as the end of the month comes, the Disability Rights Organization requests this as a open records request from every district in the state, so that'll be the next people that'll be reporting it to based on open records. But they really want to know the number of kids that are in special education that are being secluded or restrained. So anytime a student is in the quiet room, or if a student has challenging behaviors and we take all the rest of the kids out of the room, those are considered seclusion. So or if we put our hands on a student and hold them in any way, it's considered restraint. So we have to report that. Teacher has to write a report every time something like that happens.
Okay.
So it looks like to me that even though it looks like 87 is a big number, it looks like it's a small group that make this, that contribute to the 87 instances.
Right.
I'll make a motion to approve the report.
A second.
Ricks, Westfall, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries 7-0. First policy reads this evening. We have policy number 458, Rule 1, School Wellness Procedure, policy number 760, Food Service Management, policy 760, the Rule of Food Service Account Management Procedures, policy 656, Student Fees, policy 565, the Procedures for Student Fees, policy 830, Rule 1, Public Use of School Facilities Procedures. You're deleting policy number 315, the Procedure for Food Service Facility Use Guidelines, and policy number 760, Exhibit Food Service Account Request Form, policy number 345.4, Promotion and Retention Rule, policy 346, Student Assessment Program Rule, 343.2, Class Size, policy 532.43, it's new, bone marrow or organ donor leave, and policy 534, substitute teacher. These are first reads. Did anyone have any questions on any of these? Okay, moving on to the second readings. There are none this evening. Gifts and donations, we do not have any this evening. Administrative reports. Lodi Primary School.
Sue Chambers, Tiffany Loken, Randy Wallace, Allison Gentinen, Sharon Whipperfirth, Denise Hasberg, Missy Brickle, and myself attended a conference in Madison this summer in August called Literacy by the Lakes. Tiffany had gotten an email about a grant that was available, so we applied. It was paid for by John and Tasha Burgage of the UW-Madison Foundation. And one of the guiding principles of that was that making literacy education meaningful increases the possibility of raising conventional forms of achievement. More importantly, meaningful literacy instruction can help children understand that through literacy, they can expand their intellectual lives and relationships and experience a sense of agency in determining their futures. So basically, thinking about what they're learning, wanting to be readers. We are not readers if we just have the skills. We are readers if we actually read. We're not runners if we don't run. We're capable, but we don't do it. So we took what we learned those 3 days. We had time to work together, and we learned strategies that we can bring back and use in the classrooms, and we had time to plan for our back-to-school in-services and for an initiative that we want to start this year. So at the back-to-school in-service, the team that went to Literacy by the Lakes and the Language Arts Committee, all of us had read Igniting a Passion for Reading, and we kicked it off at the back-to-school. Staff are going to be modeling reading in front of children. We have literacy celebrations planned throughout the years. It ties in with our RTI, but we take a break off to look at data and move our children around. That week is going to be a literacy celebration, and I'm looking forward to a great year where all of our students are going to be readers, not just capable of reading, but actually read. The sneak a peek and kickoff went great at the end of the month. I'd like to thank the bus company. They come and park buses and have a bus driver available to answer questions of parents and get those little 4- and 5-year-olds on a bus and see it before that first day of school. I'd like to thank Pete Price for taking those beautiful staff pictures again this year. He always brings them in the next day, and we get them put up right away. I'd also like to thank all of you for adding a 6th section of kindergarten. As of today, we have 109 students, so about 18 students per class. The staff has been great helping Caitlin Rilling get ready for this adventure, and the students are just loving her. And I've heard good things from the parents. I've gotten emails from the parents how she has welcomed the kids in and made them feel comfortable. I'd also like to thank Joe Jelnick and everybody else who made it possible for those high school students to come that first day of school. LCAT donated pencils, Adam Steinberg donated bumper stickers, and the kids just thought it was great. It got everybody started off on a great foot. So, any questions?
Thank you. Elementary school.
Well, I won't repeat the things that Sherry thanked people for us, but thank you to Pete and Joe for organizing those things. We had 100% participation in some classrooms for our sneak a peek, but overall we had 90% attendance for our sneak a peek on August 30th, and it was a great event, and I want to thank our 5th graders for coming in and helping give tours and handing out flyers and things to help our 1st graders and new students to the district get around the building. I gave you our enrollment numbers as of when I wrote the report, so you have those, and I guess I won't talk about LCAT pencils because Sherry did. We had Officer Scott Klinko come also for that first day, and he brought his canine Athena. The kids loved seeing the dog and the police officer there the very first day. We kicked off our year on Thursday with a PBIS assembly. The PBIS team came up with a skit, and so we had a skit for the kids at the end of the day to talk about positive behavior is super. Sharon Whipperford put together a short video for us, and it was a great assembly, a good way to kick off the year, and we had a short video presented by Kid President as well. And on Friday then, we had our first ever all-school PBIS day, so there's the lessons that you teach throughout the year to do that, and we decided that first week to kick that off. We had 7 lessons and 7 fun activities, kind of like a field day. So we grouped the kids together, 1st through 5th. They went around in groups of 30. They learned a lesson, had a fun activity, learned another lesson about the bathrooms, the hallways, the cafeteria, recess, and all the different areas of school just to kind of get that positive incentive going right away at the start of the year. So that was really a great thing, and I thank the PBIS team for putting that all together. Do you have any questions?
Thank you. Middle school.
Good evening. We got off to a great start the year with the students and staff, and I'd really like to commend the staff for really going above and beyond to help make all the kids feel comfortable. I really think we do a great job with all the new kids. We have ambassadors and other things to really help acclimate new kids to the community, so great thing. Wanted to thank LCAT as well for handing out pencils and bumper stickers, as well as Mr. Jelnick for getting the athletes to come on over. We've just started cross-country and volleyball. We have 66 students participating in those events. Wanted to welcome Ann Kirschbaum. That's who we hired to replace Joe Jelnick, and she's doing a great job in 8th grade social studies. Wanted to give you an update. We had the Orange Out Day last September 8th, and we earned $122.50 for the